Do you know how a tiny 11-year-old girl can beat everyone to become the fly casting champion? And what do you think is the best length and action of rod right now for casting? And would you like to know why some of the best fly casters in the world right now are using first-generation graphite from the 1970s to win championships? Today we have the greatest fly casting coach in the world, and he's going to get us lined out for success this season. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about anyone out there. Chris Korich, legendary casting champion, legendary coach to some of the best in the world, including Maxine McCormick, is going to shed some insight on what it takes for success. And you're going to hear the whole story about Maxine, how she did it at 9, 10, 11 years old, how she beat everyone in the world. It's an amazing story. You're going to find out today what the number one most important thing is to know about fly casting and a rod and what gear to use. We're also going to get the history of fly rods and some of the famous names that got us to where we are. We're going to find out about how the ferrule was created, who that was. We've talked about this before. And also some of the best brands who have rods that are focused on what we're talking about today. And we're going to get into it all. Plus, you're going to find out why a firm rod tip and a soft butt is what you need for success. Casting champion and casting coach, one of the best, Chris Korich from KorichFlycasting.com. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, Dave. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's great to finally have you on here. We've been we were talking behind the scenes a little bit on some of the podcasts we've had with some people you know, including the Ray Jeff brothers and folks around the Golden Gate Casting Club. We've done some podcast episodes there to hear the history. We're going to talk to you because you are one of the big guys. I think that we definitely haven't talked in this podcast, but you're a big person behind a lot of the people who have won some of the events, including Maxine McCormick, who we're going to talk about today. I think she was 12 or 13 when she won one of her first events. So we're going to get into that. You're a casting instructor. You've got all sorts of history here. So, but before we do, maybe just check in with you. How are you feeling? I know you made a big move. Are you feeling settled now? And you're in Portland, right?
Yeah, born and raised in Oakland, California, right across the Bay Bridge. And, I just did a big move, and I have both of my daughters now living up in Portland, and sister and mom moved up here. And so I decided, hey, easier for grandpa to, move than everyone else, obviously. And, hard to leave the Bay Area in a way, but I'll still be traveling back and forth to help run the casting games. And I still compete and obviously coach the U.S. casting team. So, and the McCormick family moved up here back in 2017. So a lot of other friends like Steve and Tim just across the river,
Yeah, exactly. Well, like we said, we're going to talk casting. We're going to get in some tips and tricks and things like that. But I also want to touch on the history. So, where do you want to start? I think we've got a lot going on here. We've been off air talking about this with Tim, Ray, Jeff, and Steve and all the crazy stuff that they've done. I mean, really the amazing stuff, the Steve being kind of the Michael Jordan, as you've said, of fly casting. But maybe take us back. Let's start with the history a little bit here. Maybe put us into fly fishing. When did you run into Steve, and was that right around the time you started fly casting?
Well, as I shared with you before, I grew up in the Oakland Hills right across from San Francisco. And we, of course, have the famous Golden Gate Angling and Casting Club in Golden Gate Park. There's also an Oakland Casting Club that goes back to the 30s. And many of our famous members actually started at the Oakland Club. And the casting pools in San Francisco, that club started out at Stowe Lake in Golden Gate Park back in 1893, Dave.
Wow.
I don't know if you swung by the whole park. I know you went to the casting pools recently. Yep. But nonetheless, my parents just happened to buy a home 2 blocks, from the elementary school I went to, and 2 blocks the other direction from what my brother and I used to call the trout ponds. It was just a beautiful park that was open the year before I was born. And the Oakland Casting Club had previously been at another park, Lake Temescal up in the hills. And they, along with other outdoor groups in the area, raised money. And in 1958, they opened the casting pools that were designed by some of the members. And And of course, many of the Golden Gate members came over for that. But the Golden Gate pools were built in 38 and the Oakland pools were built in 1958. And I was born in 1959. So it was either 2 blocks to the baseball diamond, in the playground, or it was 2 blocks to what we called the trout ponds. And it was actually a combination of these casting ponds that the Oakland Club built. And there was also actually a little stock trout pond with an old timer in a rustic shed. And you could take your grandkids down and rent a little bamboo pole and a little for 2 bits for 25 cents, a little bit of bait. And so you could catch your first stocked trout. They'd bring trout in from Northern California, from Lassen Hatchery. And so I caught my first fish there with Grandpa. And when I was 8 years old, I actually got a job there every weekend helping people catch fish. This was about a year before I actually started casting. So my brother and I hung out at the trout ponds, and we both got jobs helping people catch fish there. And then we graduated to our paper routes,
That's amazing. So you started, this casting thing has been going, it's in your blood. I mean, so before that, were there any fly anglers in your family?
Yeah, my mom's side, both her and her younger brother, my uncle, they grew up with Grandpa fishing a lot when they were kids, especially up in southern Oregon on the Rogue River. That was the favorite place of my grandfather's. And so, we had that. That's not really why we got into it. It's just, of course, we had that great first fishing experience, with the little trout pond where you catch your fish. And then my brother and I started fishing the local reservoirs up in the hills. That Lake Temescal, where the club first had its casting activities back to 36. And, the crazy thing was that, we used to kind of grab onto the, coattails of the old timers and kind of like, hey, mister, what are you doing? And we'd see this guy casting at rings, and we kind of wanted them to let us try it.
Yeah.
We didn't own our own rod. And we were just like pesty little kids, playing around the park. And there's a creek that went through there that flew through the trout ponds, and and catching, pollywogs and things like that. And, but nonetheless, they kind of gave us the cold shoulder when we were little, but as we were coming out of the creek one day, we had dammed it up, to catch, water skeeters and stuff. And my brother tripped, and my older brother, Stan, and he tripped on a rod. Somebody had thrown away a little plastic push button, close face spinning reel rod. It was all tangled and kind of rusted. And he goes, wow, look at what I found here. And, it wasn't castable or anything. And so we took it home. And I've always been a little bit of a Mr. Fix-It kind of, as it'll come out. I'm kind of an equipment, nerd. And that was the first rod and reel I actually worked on. I took it all apart. I think I got some oil and stuff and got off the rust and got it apart, cut all the line off. We went and bought a spool, bought some lead sinkers that were way too big. We just thought the bigger, the better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we go down to the casting ponds, to the trout ponds with this little rod and start slinging lead over the heads of the old guys that didn't help us. And then they didn't have a choice. We were either going to kill them with a piece of lead or they were going to have to teach us. And they came over and they said, you can't do that here. And cut off the lead and gave us a little official practice plug. And so that's the start. My brother and I sharing a rod and casting at the hoop, so the rings in the pool with a little official plug. The guys introduced themselves, and it turned out they were a couple of the best casters at the time. And one of them was left-handed, and I'm left-handed, and he became my coach. His name was Tony Perry. Huh. He was one of the top 3 or 4 fly casters in the country at the time, and that's how it started on the Oakland side of the bay for us, just going down to the trout ponds and sharing this little push button rod.
Wow, that's amazing. And there's I'm excited about the history because we're going to connect to some of the other podcasts we've done, like I said, with Tim Dre, Jeff, and hopefully we'll have Steve on eventually. But I want to hear about Maxine McCormick because, I think she was like 12 or 13 when she won her first, event. And to me, that's amazing because I have a daughter right now that's 12. And to think that she would be out there competing with, other women, adults, and men too, it seems crazy. So talk about that. How did you get to a point where you became the coach of Maxine, and how did you take her to winning events at such a young age?
Well, for me, I was about 9 or 10 when this whole thing started, when we found that rod, and one thing led to another. And, Same thing with Steve. He's about 2.5, 3 years older than me. Tim's my age. And so we all grew up about the same age of 9 or 10, starting out at the casting clubs. And, like anything, it's magical when you learn early. So I had the benefit of starting very young and being mentored by these great casters and previous champions at both the Oakland Club and later the Golden Gate Club. And so, I really started teaching people when I was 12. My parents were teachers. So, fast forward, we've had many champions, both teammates, that I was able to learn from and coach along the way. And, we've had tons of different great casters from the United States, but the San Francisco Bay Area and our clubs have pretty much dominated the sport for 100 years. And so Steve and Tim and I were blessed. And, about 11 years ago, I got a call from one of our U.S. team members, Donna O'Sullivan, at the Golden Gate Club. I was working in the ski industry in Vail, Colorado at the time. And she said, "Hey," she goes, "you've been talking about we need a new kid." And at the club, we hadn't had a kid in a while. And I was thinking some little Steve Ray Jeff or
Right.
a little kid to show up like us. And she says, "This little girl showed up today, and I taught her the basic stuff that you teach and the grip and the stance. And when are you coming back?" I got this excited message. It was actually New Year's Day of 2013.
Oh, wow.
And I called Donna back, and she was really animated and excited about this father and daughter that she met at the club on New Year's Day. She was just, taking the day off and enjoying herself. And she spotted this little kid and went over, and she called me right away because we had recently been talking about the fact we hadn't had a kid in a while. And I told her, "Don't worry." I said, "When the next kid shows up, I'll be ready to teach him the old Jedi master secrets. And we'll teach all these old timers at the club a lesson." And so I got back. Donna started helping Maxine, gave her a few things to just kind of step-by-step stuff to do to help her. And I flew back a little over a month later from Vail, and after all the ski shows and everything. And I met Maxine. We picked a date. I met Maxine and her father, Glenn McCormick, and asked her lots of questions. And she was a very smart young girl, and she was into other sports and things. And I used some analogies, asked her about some different things she did, and gave her first lesson. And by chance, we were having a memorial that day at the club. Sometimes things are just almost like just chance and special. But Steve came in about an hour or so later. His flight was a little late because we had this memorial for one of our members that had passed away. And so I introduced Steve to Maxine and Glenn, the father. And then he was like, "Hey, why don't we teach her how to, score the targets and how to play a little game?" And so we actually, started teaching her how to be a judge. And Steve and I did a little head-to-head cast-off of one of the fun, bigger 8-weight games called Bassbug, where the fly makes a big, splat, like a popping bug, so it makes a splash when it hits the target. And so the very first day, within about 2 hours, not only did Maxine get her first pointers from me, but she was scoring Steve, Rajeff, and me, and having a good time calling out the scores at 9 years old. So,
Wow.
It's kind of crazy. And I know the dad called me, I guess, the next day or so, and we exchanged numbers and made a date to meet. And he said, "God, I didn't know how to describe it to, my wife, that we went out to this casting pool, and it was like, getting lessons from Tiger Woods and, Phil Mickelson or something." It was, Steve and I were both there, and we had a good time. And of course, Steve didn't live in the area, but that was the start. I started helping Maxine and her father. A couple days later, we met on the weekend, and within a short amount of time, Dave, I could see how focused she was. And I thought, okay, this will be the way to wake everybody up at the clubs and get people to start practicing their casting,
Yep.
What about you? I mean, you started really young too.
Yeah, I did too. The interesting thing is that's one of my things with the casting. I mean, I can cast a fly rod, but so my dad was a guide on the Deschutes and for my whole life. So pretty much, I grew up around the fly shop, and I was same thing when I was 12. I was out on his guide trips, kind of helping new guys that didn't didn't know how to cast, but I wasn't an instructor. So I was just out there more helping catch fish and doing that stuff. And I never really took a lesson. That's my one downfall. I never spent time or paid any money to do that. So I still have lots of struggles. And of course, Spay got into that and still struggle with that. But that's my story. I got started early because of my dad, and But I still need a lesson. This is a good reminder for everybody.
Yeah, we'll have to get together and change that.
Yeah.
Best thing is the future, obviously, of the young kids for all of us. I'm 65 now and I've been doing this 55 years. So my real focus is, it's great to help the fellow teammates in the U.S. team getting ready to go represent our country and stuff. But, it's all about improving your fundamentals for fishing and the kids of the future. So you can come and we'll give you a pointer, and you can bring your kids, your daughters too. And we can kind of help get them going on the right path so they don't go as long as you did without a
That's right. Yeah, and I think actually one of them is pretty excited, so I think this will be something we could talk about here. But back to Maxine, so maybe take us back to her first event that she won. How old was she, and what was that like? Was that a surprise for her, or did everybody expect it? And what was the event?
Well, it was good fortune because after meeting her, it was February of 2013 that I came back and met her and her dad, Glenn. But 5 months later, we were hosting the National Casting Championships. There's different casting clubs in the United States, angling and casting clubs like Golden Gate in Oakland. And we have an American Casting Association. I'm actually the current president of that. It's kind of the governing body for the fun sport of casting games. And we were hosting, the Oakland Club had bid to host the national championship that August of 2013. So, once we started training, and practicing, Maxine and the dad were just having a great time together. And the father had fly fished a long time. Glenn had been fishing since a little kid. And he really just was praying that his first child, would want to fish with him. And she would go along and play in the rocks and, help net fish and stuff. But she hadn't learned to cast yet for the most part. So they were just having a wonderful time, learning. They're both kind of perfectionists, and they're like, hey, we want to cast like Steve and Chris. So that was the start of it. We had a tournament, I think, about 6 weeks after we first started Low Casting Games. And I said, hey, this is a good way to accelerate your learning. A lot of people think of tournament casting. I try not the word tournament. Most golfers don't want to enter a tournament, but they still want to go play games, and they want to bet and this and that. And, the same thing, if, the casting games or the sport has different games to challenge you with different types of fishing tackle. So like trout fly accuracy or big fly accuracy, with a bigger fly and bigger outfit. And so the games are there just to work on the fundamentals of your casting. So I said, hey, look, let's play these little games and, we'll have you enter one of these little casting, games or tournaments. And so that was about a month later. She had a great time. So they started training, even though at first they were a little reluctant. I said, hey, we're going to have this national championship. Maxine could be the youngest fly caster. She was still going to be 9. I said she could be the youngest fly caster we've ever had at a national. Most kids start with spinning tackle and bait casting stuff. So, but she wanted to learn how to fly cast because that's what her dad was doing. So they both competed 5 months later in the national championship that we were hosting. And Maxine was in the junior division. But everyone took notice because she was already, casting, with some proficiency and throwing nice loops and just this little tiny, at that time, she was probably 68 pounds or something. And we have a lot of photographs of it. And everybody was watching. And it's like, how in the heck is this little girl doing this,
Yeah.
But they really got into it. I was practicing with them, that summer leading up to the tournament, probably 4 days a week. And I don't know if it was Maxine or the father, Glenn, that wanted to do it more, but Father Glenn actually got out west because he played in the farm system for the Oakland A's. He's a great athlete, big, tall guy, 6'4", and he'd injured himself and didn't make it to the majors, but baseball was his sport, and I grew up with baseball. So it was just something that was competitive and fun, and they were going fishing on weekends, and if they weren't away fishing in Northern California, they were at the casting club, and they just got ready, and they had a great experience. Maxine cast really good, so did Glenn, and that kind of started it. And a year later, we went to the national that was hosted in Tennessee by an angling club out there, and Maxine outscored even though she was still in the junior division, she outscored every woman at the tournament. And people were just shocked, a year later, how much progress she had made. And her dad did really well just for 1 year of experience, you did fantastic as well. And that's what kind of got it going. We took this trip and had a good time. The next year, the tournament at 11, Maxine went down. They competed at Long Beach. We have a great sister casting club in Long Beach, California, Long Beach Casting Club. And she not only beat every woman there, she beat everyone in the country except Steve and myself. And her father beat her by 1 point. And she made the All-American team. You have to make top 5 in the country. And her dad got 3rd and she got 4th, and she was, all of 11 years old. And that's what kind of started all the media, the Chronicle, Cisco. Tom Steenster did a big article about this little kid beating everyone in the country except her father and Steve and Chris. And the press started to take notice. And, next thing you know, we're getting, interviews with Gink and Gasoline and Break Magazine and this and that. And, so at 11 is when things really started to kind of hit, and social media, people started to kind of follow the scores. Donna, who first met Maxine, she was always posting results and how Maxine was doing, from 9 to 11. But I handed Maxine the results to the World Championships that took place. And I said, hey, look, in 2010, and I showed her the results, and she did the math, and the games are a little different. And there's a game in the World Championship called Trout Accuracy. It's at slightly different targets and different scoring. But about 3 days after I gave her the results and she looked at the scores and stuff, she went to her dad and said, hey, I want to go to Norway and I want to try to beat those women. So Maxine's a very competitive, young woman, and at that time a young girl, and more than anything, she just can't stand failing or losing. She gets that a lot from dad and mom. And so anyway, after she made the All-American team and got 4th in the country that year, that was 2015 down at Long Beach, she said she wanted to go. And I said, well, look, the World Championships, a lot of pressure, and you'll be competing against, the best women in the world. There's no junior division. So if we're going to do this, we have to put a schedule together and work hard at it, because I know you hate losing, kid. And so we trained really, really hard that whole year. And as she was growing, she was probably up to 85 pounds at that time. And by the time we got ready for the tournament a year later, she was all of like 99 pounds and 5 foot nothing, Dave.
Yep.
We went over to Estonia. The Estonia Casting Federation was hosting the World Fly Casting Championships. And we traveled to Estonia, made a nice trip out of it, did some sightseeing and stuff, father and daughter. Donna was there joining us on the team. And so the 4 of us went over there, and Maxine slayed everybody in the world. She beat both the father and Maxine, outscored everyone in the qualifying round. And at 4:00 in the afternoon, when the finals came up, you have to make finals like track and field.
Oh, yeah.
Top 8 people make finals. And they were casting at the same time, both for the world title. I had already previously cast, and Maxine won the women's division, shot the highest score, and I ended up shooting the highest score in the men's. Father Glenn got the bronze medal, and so it's just a great start. Wow. But a 12-year-old becoming the youngest world champion in the history of any sport, and it was, everyone there knew it was something special, and it's just kind of exploded since then, but she just, and the cool thing, something we want to get into, I mentioned the other day to you, talking about the show, is I think people don't realize, they hear about tournament casting and people know about Steve and Tim and myself and then Maxine being the latest champion we have. But like, how can this happen?
Yeah.
How can a little tiny kid go in 2.5 years and outscore, Paul Arden of Sexy Loops, right, and all these other casters that are fishing guides and, big, powerful people and very experienced women fly fishers and stuff. And how is it that's, not only could, we do well as kids, and then, 50 years later, a little tiny girl does it. And common denominator really is the equipment that we learned with as kids. The Rajep brothers and I, we were really blessed. And that's something we can chat about, because I think this is something that's really holding people back today. And what about you? What are your experiences with different types of rods and your first rods and equipment and stuff.
I'm really excited to have this conversation because I love that. I mean, obviously Maxine was a superstar. I mean, it reminds me of all you name the person, Michael Jordan, Kobe, probably any of the greatest of the sports were those. You always Tiger Woods, right, before he could walk or whatever. Maxine was kind of in that range, right, and blew things out. So, and she had that work ethic, which is cool. But for me, it was, same thing like a lot of people, 9'5" weight. I mean, I still have one of the first steelhead rods my dad gave me here, Lamb of Glass, but it was pretty standard stuff, just whatever rod you would get off the shelf, Temple Fork Outfitters, and that was it. Just so, I started, if you think about it, I'm probably in the mid 80s. I was out there. So whatever the rods were then.
Early generation, mid 80s is like, or when second generation graphite was out, IM6 graphite. And so the graphite was just starting to get lighter.
Right.
As Tim talked about, Jimmy Green, a lot of this equipment stuff goes back to the great tackle designers and tackle tinkers at the Golden Gate and Oakland clubs. Jimmy Green, who many people know as, he's passed now back in 2006, but Jim was the first kind of world fly casting champion, amateur champion that went overseas and won big. He started at the Oakland Club in 1936 and started casting, and then he was discovered actually by a guy, a champion fly distance caster from the Portland area, from the Portland Club that used to exist, and Marvin Hedge. He had set a new flight distance record. So there's a lot of champions from the Portland area, actually.
Yeah. Where was that Portland Club? Where was the actual casting, the ponds?
Yeah, the ponds are actually built here in 1936. They're located in Westmoreland Park, which is kind of just on the east side of the river, a little south of the city, southeast suburb. And Westmoreland's a beautiful park. And back in the 30s, with the Depression, they were trying to create jobs. And the club, the Portland Casting Club, and they had a women's club, they applied for the WPA grants that were building a lot of things to create jobs. Members of the Portland Club actually dug this massive pool. They got, paid to do it. And Marvin Hedge had set this fly distance record in 1934. So they kind of used that. Hey, we got this, world record holder here. We need a casting pool. And this Westmoreland Park was just being built. So the casting pool was actually the centerpiece of the whole park. There's baseball diamonds, and Maxine's brother plays Little League baseball over there now, as they bought a home 5 minutes away from that casting when they moved up from San Francisco, relocated. But, Westmoreland Casting Pool is, right here. It's twice the size of Golden Gate. And, you've been to Golden Gate, which is like the size of a football field with casting.
Yeah.
And the pool here in Portland is actually like 2 football fields side by side. It's gigantic. But the club died out in the 60s. The old clubhouse is sitting there. The city just uses it for tools and things. And, it kind of needs to be revitalized, and the pool needs some work, but it's still a beautiful place. And, it won't be long with me just moving up here, probably next spring when they clean the pool. They drain it for the winter, but when they clean it and stuff, we'll get targets out there. And
oh, nice. We've
done training out there, and I surely, could see, a youth program going again and getting local kids, exposed to fishing and learning how to use their tackle.
Grand Teton Fly Fishing is a premier guide service and fly shop that has access to some of the most coveted rivers and lakes in western Wyoming. Their simple goal is to share their valued resource and have you experience a native cutthroat trout rising to a single dry fly in the shadows of the Tetons. You can check out Grand Teton right now at grandtetonflyfishing.com. Let them know you heard of them through this podcast. Discover Smitty's Fly Box for premium flies. Their monthly subscription service delivers expertly crafted flies and materials tailored to your fishing environment. Boasting over 30 years of experience, Smitty's is your trusted source for a diverse range of flies. Enhance your fishing experience and make life easier with their carefully created selections. You can subscribe right now at smittysflybox.com and join a community of passionate anglers. Well, going back to the equipment, or staying on the equipment, so on Maxine. So what was it? What did that first year look like? What were the things she was doing to get ready to win this thing? Like maybe some tips that people could think about. And I know there's probably some stuff people at home could maybe do, but what would you tell somebody who's listening now and they want to get better at their casting?
Well, obviously the key is getting out and, as Tim says, away from fish and practicing. And of course, when you have, a casting facility in your backyard, 2 blocks away, or, a quarter-mile away, like myself and the Rajos had, that's a real blessing. But of course, you can go out on a grass field. There's plenty of soccer fields and parks around, and there's bodies of water, and some people have access to swimming pools and things like that. It's obviously best to get on the water when you can, but on the equipment side of things, you mentioned the 9-foot 5-weight, as one of your first rods and stuff. And
yeah,
that's kind of become, over the last 40 years, as soon as rods started getting lighter, that became the, de facto starting trout rod. And how many do you own, Dave?
Oh my God, I've got a lot. I've had to make an effort to get, over years did not get more 9-foot 5-weights, but yeah, I have more of those than probably anything else.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, the golfer that's searching for the magical putter that's going to help their putting. And, and it's not to knock any of the companies, because there's a lot of wonderful rods out there, but, that's not what most people learned on in the old days, and we learned on bamboo and fiberglass rods. And of course, you've had a lot of shows where you started to talk about fiberglass and fiberglass back. And so really that's the common denominator, is the Ray Jeffs and myself and everyone before us, from when we started late 60s, early 70s, it really was a magical time in equipment. People don't realize that the great bamboo rods, and of course the fiberglass rods that really took off in the 50s and the 60s before we introduced this graphite. And Jimmy Green was a big part of this. Jimmy, this famous caster from the Oakland Club, he went on to become the Fenwick rod designer starting in around 1960. And he was working down in Southern California. They moved production down from Woodland, Washington, down there, because he was living by the Long Beach Casting Club. And he started working on, these great affordable fiberglass rods. And he developed the ferrule system, the tip over butt ferrules that were patented by Fenwick. And a lot of people don't know, like, the Fenwick Rod Company, when it was eventually sold off and stuff, they built a factory up in Bainbridge Island, and the Sage factory is the old Fenwick factory.
Oh, wow.
Where Steve and I used to go as kids.
Crazy.
The Sage was started by Don Green, but Don was actually the blank manufacturer. Don had a company called Grizzly Rod Company or Blank Company. He made tubular rods, fiberglass rods, in the late 50s and 60s. And so Fenwick bought these blanks, and they eventually, brought Don into the company. They bought out Grizzly, and, Fenwick kind of ruled the world, in fishing with fiberglass rods in the 60s and early 70s. And then Jimmy started tinkering around with graphite in about 72, 73. And he launched, he was sending prototypes down to the casting club, to his old casting mate, which was our coach, Phil Maravelli, famous member at Golden Gate. You would have seen his picture up on the wall in the clubhouse. And, Jim and Phil developed a lot of things in the history of the club. The shooting head with monofilament behind it was something that they came up with back in the 40s. And but Jim was the constant tinkerer, and he would feed rods down to the club. And so he sent this first graphite rod down to Phil, his old buddy, and wanted, Phil to have Steve try it and so forth. And of course, Steve let, myself, Tim try it. And so the first graphite rod actually came to the Golden Gate Club. But these fiberglass rods just before that were really magical. And, a lot of people think of, bamboo and fiberglass as being slow action rods. The old ones are really soft rods. And I almost, if there's anything we can do on this podcast, is to strike that word from our vocabulary, slow, because people think, God, I cast too slow already and I can't get a good loop and I don't want a slow rod. But actually what we're talking about are full action, full flexing rods where you can feel the line extremely well. And that's the key, is feel. So back to Maxine, early on, I worked on her equipment. Of course, had to sand all the handles down because she was so small and tiny. And her dad did have a graphite rod for her. He had bought a bunch of rods for a kid's summer program he put together, and I actually went through all of them and picked out the best one. It was one of the little youth rods. But then very quickly, I got Maxine on first generation, very full flexing graphite rods that we had come out with in the 70s and 80s. In fact, Maxine won that first world title and has won the casting since with old rods that we designed all the way back in the Fenwick days, and they're shorter. Her rod that she had grown to was an 8.5-foot fly rod with a mandated 5-weight line. And Maxine and myself and her father were the only ones using shorter rods at that first world championship, 8.5-foot rods. And it gave us a big advantage in the wind, and they're full flexing rods. So it gives us exquisite feel. And this is the key. If you can't feel what you're doing, and, think of anything you humans learn.
Yeah. Like baseball, hitting a golf ball or a baseball.
Yeah. I mean, do we learn to walk fast? Let's think about fast action rods and high modulus rods that everybody has sold today, when they're starting out. I mean, we don't learn to walk fast. We don't talk fast, even though I'm talking now. We don't draw fast. Everything we learn slowly if we're going to learn well. And yet we put people on rods that are so light and have so little feel when you're first learning. And with a very short cast, they require a very short casting stroke. And we don't learn any sport or any human activity like this. And yet everyone needs a high modulus fast action rod. I say wrong.
Right.
And, this is the problem. And it's not to knock these rods, because once you learn how to cast, when they're casting in really windy conditions, and when I'm out salt fishing and you got a 30-knot wind and you're throwing 8 weights, 10 weights, 12 weights. Yeah, I want a lighter, skinnier graphite rod to be able to deal with those wind conditions. But I don't need that necessarily for trout fishing.
Right.
So basically, it's these full flexing, full action rods that I was able to get Maxine and Father Glenn onto, just like Steve and Tim and I learned with, and literally, rods back to the 60s. In fact, the whole U.S. team, we train on full action rods in shorter lengths, and then we build up from there.
Really? Can you get like now, if somebody wanted to get a full action rod, where would they go to find one?
Well, there's more fiberglass rods and shorter rods becoming available. It's just starting to happen.
Yeah, badass glass, right?
Yeah, that's right. Other companies, the badass glass, that was actually, he came out with those at first at 9 feet. We were testing those in San Francisco, and we're actually cleaning out the parents' home. And we were talking about it one day, and I said, "Hey, look," I said, "you and I can cast these 9-foot rods, but we need shorter rods. We need we got to get this thing shorter so that the average guy can move it through the air, especially saltwater fishing." And that's why he came out. He started tinkering around and shortened them a whole foot to the 8-foot badass rods. In fact, that was the first weekend that he had watched little Maxine casting, and she was about 10, and he was just like, "What the heck, man? This kid is doing great." And of course, he saw her using these old, shorter rods. And later on that day, we're working on the parents' home, cleaning it out and talking about how we need shorter rods. So, Tim is, and the guys at Echo are working on it. You've got, a company like, Scott, Winston and Scott were both from San Francisco as kids. Steve and I used to go to the Winston, factory down on 3rd Avenue and turn our handles down on our rods. And, it was owned by one of our famous members at the club before it was moved to Montana. People don't realize a lot of the tackle evolved right out of San Francisco, with Winston and then later on Scott. But Scott has some, shorter rods today. They make, in the trout series, they have 8-foot 4-inch lengths and 8-foot 8-inch lengths. So it's a combination of shorter levers, kind of proportionate to your body size.
And full flex rods and full action. So you can feel it. You can feel the cast almost in the handle, right? Is that kind of the idea?
You have to feel the fly line.
Yeah.
The fly line's at the end of the rod. And it's kind of think about it in terms of rod length and faster action rods. These act like much, stiffer, longer levers. So if you're learning an exercise at the gym, I'm going to teach you a new workout exercise, and I'm going to hand you, a 10-pound or 15-pound dumbbell to get the feel of the stroke of the actual exercise you're doing. And you don't hand somebody a 50-pound dumbbell when they're trying to learn something new. And to a certain extent, putting people on longer, stiffer, faster action rods that are very light, where they can't feel things. This is like handing somebody a dumbbell that's,
Yeah, it's so cool because I've done some things, like I mentioned my daughters, I got them a fiberglass rod. Can't remember who recommended it, but I got them a couple of short rods. I think one might even be a 7.5 footer. I can't remember. I'll have to look, but they're super short. They're super flex. So now if somebody wanted to get one, do you pretty much have to get a fiberglass rod, or are there any graphite rods out, or would you even want a graphite rod that's like full flex?
Well, there are some, fuller action, shorter length rods out there now, like TFO. Kind of worked with them a little bit on some social media and podcasts. So we started teaching with those. Tim has his, Echo Gecko rod for the kid that's shorter and with a small handle. The handle size is really important too for little people. We hand them a rod with a big handle, and this is just really tiring. And so all the way along with Maxine, I was constantly, customizing the handles. And as she grew, her handles grew, obviously. But, you've got the TFO has the little bug launcher series that are $99. They make that in a 7-foot length and an 8-foot length. Reddington has not only their kids rod, but they have a series called the classic trout rods that are 8.5. They make them in different lengths, but they do offer them in 8.5-foot lengths.
Yeah. When would you get a 7-foot length, say that bug launcher, versus an 8-foot or 8.5?
Yeah, for the little tiny kids, we start out the little 7-8-year-olds. We do teach them fly casting. We use these little 7-foot bug launchers or Echo Geckos that are like 7'9". Of course, these are graphite rods or combination graphite and glass rods, and they're less expensive. But we definitely need, if there's any challenge I want to put out there, with this podcast to the industry, especially now that I'm kind of, resettled and semi-retired, is I think that this is an opportunity. Everybody's got 4, 5, 9-foot 5 weights.
Yeah.
And yet I stick a 8-foot 4-inch or 8-foot 6-inch rod in somebody's hand, and I don't even tell them that it's a shorter rod. And especially if it's a fuller action rod, and they get the 3-letter word.
Yep.
They feel what they're doing, and then they get a wow,
Right.
And it's a universal thing. They go, wow, this rod, I can really feel the line. They almost can't describe it, except they go, wow, geez.
That's huge.
Yeah. And, all you have to do, as an example, maybe I think just before the pandemic, we had a new group of women flycasters at the club, and they asked me to do a little session with them. There was 22 of them. And I went and I set up off to the side a 7.5-foot and 8-foot fiberglass rod, actually some older Fenwicks from the 60s, some real magical rods like Steve and I learned with, and set up a couple of 8-foot and 8.5-foot first generation graphite rods, which are also stretchier and more flexible, from the 70s and 80s. And I said, here's the deal. We're going to go out, watch you all cast, and we're going to go over a few things. But I want you all to cycle through these 4 stations, and I want you to try these 7.5 and 8-foot rods and 8.5-foot rods. And they all tried it. And in fact, all 22 women, when we were done, I took a little pause. I said, okay, what was your favorite rod that you cast today that you tried? And 22 out of 22 women chose the 7.5-foot fiberglass rod.
Wow.
Now, how can that be if, they've been indoctrinated to buy a 9-foot 5 weight or some package rod or something? But 22 out of 22 women go, wow, it was just, you could really feel the line, and I could roll cast. There's the other question. Like, think about it. You've roll cast before.
Oh, yeah. Love roll casting.
Tim and myself, if there's anything we do when we're starting people out, is just have them work on the fundamental roll cast. Of course, it's, you kind of need to be on, it's best to be on water, but you can anchor your fly. There's things you can do on grass. But, I remember once somebody was kind of arguing with me. I was talking about softer, fuller rods, and we really need to, I was talking to a fellow instructor at an industry show. I think it was the Pleasanton show, in fact. And he was kind of standing firm because he was so proud about his $1,000 9-foot 5-weight rod. And I said, well, I have a question for you. What percentage of casting instructors in America would say that the roll cast is an important cast to learn? And he says, well, everybody. I mean, 100%. And I said, well, maybe it wouldn't be 100%. Some people would maybe argue. I said, but yeah, probably be 95% of people would say roll cast is important, right? For getting your line straight and being, look at spay casting today, right?
Yep.
Change of direction, roll casting, right?
Right.
And I said, all right, so if roll casting is so important, and we all agree that teaching the roll cast is one of the best ways to teach people good mechanics and good stance, good grip, why are we selling them rods that don't bend and don't roll cast well at all? See, most of these faster action rods don't feel good when you try to roll cast, and they don't roll cast well at all.
Right. And is it true that, and I've talked about this, it might have been with Tim, but I mentioned that Lamiglass. I had my dad's old Lamiglass, probably got in the 80s sometime, super flexy. You remember that one?
Yeah.
It was a great, it's probably the most full flex rod I have, and I love casting sinking lines with it. You would think that's counterintuitive. You would think that a fast action would be better, but is it true that the full flex rods are better at casting sinking and weighted stuff?
Yeah, I don't have this rod in front of me, obviously, to feel, but I know the Lamiglass rods from the past pretty well.
Yeah.
And, in fact, Gary Loomis, who started, G Loomis that Steve designed at for 40 years, Gary actually was the rod designer at Lamiglass. When we first met Gary, he was working for Lamiglass. And so he worked on a lot of those rods. Gary's a great fisherman and wasn't as much into fly fishing when we first met him back in the 70s. We were doing shows, the first fly shows, ISC shows. Yeah. But, probably, especially when you talk about how much you like this rod getting a sinking line out of the water, the great full action rods are actually firm tip, soft butt rods.
Oh, right.
In fact, in the old days, in bamboo days, the famous bamboo rods that really took over in the late 20s, 30s, and 40s were the E.C. Powell rods from Northern California, from Marysville, and also the Winston rods from San Francisco. Those were the bamboo rods that were in favor. E.C. Powell had 3 different tapers he described in his rods when he was describing action, where the rod bends. And the A taper was a super fast action rod. Even in bamboo, they did make fast action rods back in the day. And he described it as a tip bending or a tip resisting. If you wanted to talk about the tip being firm, you would say it was a tip resisting rod, right? Or a firm tip rod. So the A rod was a fast action rod. The C taper was a firm tip, soft butt rod. And he made it in particular for throwing big flies and, steelhead fishermen in the Northwest and British Columbia, and to get big lines and big flies out of the water and change direction. And you see, when you have a soft, fast action rod, you don't have good control getting a line out of the water, a sinking line, roll casting, changing direction. You want a firmer tip rod that bends more completely full down into the butt. So it's kind of like a C. Powell C taper,
Yeah, that is the rod. It's a steelhead rod.
So that's what you've got is you have an old school, firmer tip, softer, fuller action rod, and you can feel what you're doing, but the firm tip allows you to get that sinking line up out of the water and change direction.
So cool. I've also got a really cool, I've got an old rod. My dad used to make custom rods, and I'd love to, when we meet, I'll bring this up to you. You can take a look at it, but it's a custom rod that a friend, Dick Segura from TFO, he's such a cool guy. Dick came up to me and he said, hey, Dave, I got something for you. Because my dad, has been struggling with some stuff lately. And he broke out this old aluminum rod case, and it was one my dad. He said, you should have this rod. This is not something.
Wow.
And so I have a custom rod, and I don't even have it. That's actually the only custom rod I've ever had that my dad made. So it's kind of cool. But I'm interested to hear with you. Like, I'm sure it's probably that old school style of action, I'll bet. But does that also work for trout? Does the slower action, like you said, the stiff tip, slow butt, is that better for casting like like weighted stuff and all that, the split shot?
Absolutely. You hit it right ahead. Another thing with these very light modern rods. And again, once you learn how to cast, you can cast anything.
Right.
And there is an advantage when it's super windy. There are times when having a low profile ultralight rod makes sense. Obviously, as Tim described when he was going over expensive rods and different price point rods that Echo does, the higher modulus material you use, the more suspect these rods are to potentially breaking if you're not careful, or you whack them with your fly or whatever, when you're out saltwater fishing or throwing a big stone fly or something. But in addition to the action of the rod and the length of the rod being so important, so that you have good feel, it's also the balance of the rod, especially in trout tackle, lighter tackle, like 5 weights, 4, 5, 6 weights. And a good way to describe it, is that, of course, we have these beautiful reels today, and reels are starting to get lighter. But as rods were getting a lot lighter in the late 80s and 90s, when graphite 3 and then graphite 4 came out, like right when the river runs through it came out, say, with their super light rod, the first $600 rod, I think it was the SP at the time, and before some of their later stuff. And the rods got lighter and lighter, especially in the tip. And, to give you a comparison, like a fiberglass, 8.5-foot fiberglass rod that we do extensive training with, from back in the 60s, like Steve and Tim and I learned with, the top half of the rod weighs about 22 grams for the weight of the rod. And then you get one of these modern super lightweight rods, and the tip might only weigh 11 grams, half the weight. And yet we have these beautiful reels that were evolving in the, machine shop people making, nicer and nicer reels out of solid stock aluminum and stuff. And so reels actually were too heavy. Rods were getting lighter upstairs, and yet the reels, were getting heavier. And, with fancy drags and stuff versus old click and pawl reels, like old Hardy's and lighter reels, that. And so that just takes away the feel even more, because if the rod isn't balanced, especially a trout rod, a little bit on the top heavy side, with a lighter reel, again, you can't, it's like a phone call, hopefully the phone today and our reception, on sound is good. But, if you don't have 5 bars of reception with your fly line, you can't talk to it. You can't feel what you're doing. And so we went through a period, it's getting a little better now because there's more and more light reel options, but where a lot of people are still using reels that are way too heavy for the super lightweight tip rods they have. And then I put a 7.5-foot or an 8-foot rod, or a rod that's balanced with a lighter reel, and immediately they can feel the fly line, and they're like, wow, here's that 4-letter word, the feel gives them the wow.
Every angler knows the importance of impeccable gear. Jackson Hole Fly Company's fly rod combo kits are a culmination of passion, persistence, and craftsmanship. Handpicked and curated with care, each kit is designed to provide an unparalleled fly fishing experience. From the novice setting their eyes on the water for the first time with our beginner-friendly Crystal Creek combo, to the all-inclusive Flat Creek kit designed for seasoned pros. Adventures, the lightweight Fall Creek combo ensures you carry your passion on every backpacking journey. Streamer enthusiasts, let the White River kit capture your imagination. Precision and accuracy are non-negotiable for you. The Missouri River combo won't disappoint. Heed the call of the salmon with the Kenai River combo, or explore vast salts with the Tarpon Alley kit. And for those who find joy in every facet of sports, there's always a kit tailored to your unique fishing style. Discover your perfect ensemble at jacksonholeflycompany.com. I want to talk a little bit and pick your brain on the Euro nymphing rods in a sec here, but I also want to get people, we're kind of moving along here, to get people to stand up. I know, do you have some exercise that people listening now are probably sitting, maybe they're in their car, but maybe for those that could get up, do you have some exercise that maybe people can do that will help them with fly casting or anything like that?
Well, let's do something fun right now, because since we're talking about feel so much and the importance of feel when you're learning in anything, I got a question for you. I think you probably own a butter knife, right?
Yes.
You have access to one right now?
I could go find one, but yeah.
Okay. I want you to go to your kitchen and grab a butter knife. And if you got a spatula, the big spatula there, I want you to I want everybody on this podcast to go grab a butter knife, the biggest handle butter knife they have, not a steak knife where they're going to cut their hand, but a butter knife. And if they got a big spatula with a big top to it, I want you to grab that. I got a butter knife and a spatula right in front of me, Dave.
Yeah, perfect. Got it. So I got the butter knife. I got the spatula.
All right. So let's assume that a good percentage of this is the little challenge for the podcast for all the people who want to improve their fly casting and learn a little bit about their equipment, that maybe their equipment isn't helping them as much as they think, right?
Yep.
So I want you to grab the butter knife, just like, the handle of the butter knife, just like a fly rod, pretend it's your handle.
Yep.
Go ahead and stand up. Let's get a little motion in our bodies here. And I want you just to pretend like you're making a 35-foot cast, a little trout cast, with your 5 weight. And I literally want you to pantomime. You don't have a fly line on the end of this butter knife, but I want you to pantomime and make, back cast strokes and forward strokes, however you cast, Dave.
Yep.
And as you do this, I want you to really emphasize the stop of the rod. You've talked a lot with people about casting with Bill Gamble and the 5 essentials and stuff. And of course, stopping the rod is something great casters do better than so-so casters, right?
Yep.
But when you're making this casting stroke, back cast, forward cast, each stroke's about a half a second. I got a question for you with this butter knife. You're holding the handle, right?
Yep.
Does it feel like a fly rod or does it feel like a fly cast? Can you even feel anything on the end of this butter knife?
Not really. It's just a stiff butter knife.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's not bending. It's stiff, and you're holding on to the handle, and you don't really feel the fly line on the end of the rod. All right, Dave. So I want you to take the butter knife and turn it around. I want you to carefully grab the blade of the butter knife as far on the end as you can so that the handle's extended out in front of you. Okay. And I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to make the same 35-foot casting stroke and be real relaxed in your hand. And when you stop the rod, can you feel kind of a thunk feeling?
Oh, yeah, big time. Totally different.
You feel that?
Yep.
Right. So all of a sudden, you can feel the top of the fly rod, in this case, the heavy part of the handle of the butter knife, right? I hope you're not cutting your hand there. But everybody's casting. And if you close your eyes, especially, so you can really concentrate on the feel, when you stop the rod, you can feel the handle of the butter knife kind of shudder to a stop, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's because we've got some mass out at the end of this fly rod, this butter knife fly rod. And if you turn it right back around and grab onto the handle and make the same stroke, where'd the fly line go? Do you feel the stop anymore?
Nope. No, you lose it.
Yeah, it disappeared, right?
And the other one, it wants to shoot out. You could feel it wanting to go. This one, you have to really struggle to do anything, to get anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you make a stroke with the butter knife upside down, and you're holding the blade, when you come forward and stop, it almost feels like the butter knife wants to fly out of your hand.
Exactly.
Aha. So let's grab it again by the handle. When you have this feeling like you can't feel anything on the end of the rod, that's your $1,000 ultra light, ultra skinny, stiff, fast action modern fly rod. And I'm supposed to ask you to learn how to fly cast when you can't feel anything on the end of the rod.
Right.
And I'm trying to get you to stop the rod and you can't even feel where you're stopping it. Keep casting, Dave.
No, you can't.
All right. So turn the butter knife around. And now what you're feeling is what little Steve Rajeff and little Timmy Rajeff and 10-year-old Chris Korich and 50 years later, little 65-pound Maxine McCormick got to feel.
Yep.
We had fiberglass rods and early graphite rods that had more weight out at the end of the rod, more tip weight or top half weight. We happened to just be lucky that we had reels with these heavier rods that balance them, like the old fiberglass rods with Fluger Metalist reels,
Oh, yeah.
And it was just chance. The story here is that, people have asked me for years, how is it that, Steve and Tim and you and all these casters from Golden Gate, are so good? And how did you guys get so good? And how can we be 65 years old? I think Steve's about to turn 68 in a few days. How in the heck are we still out casting people? And I'm telling you, the story is not a story. It's history. The great rods, the bamboo and fiberglass rods, and even the early graphite rods that we got to help, put our input with Jimmy Green at Fenwick. These rods were balanced. You had more mass in the tip. The tips were firmer in most cases. And we used smaller, lighter reels as the rods got lighter. Like we used our super small diameter, like Hardy Lightweights and Hardy Perfects, and, the lightweight series of reels and other reels like it. And, when graphite started to evolve and higher modulus graphite came out for the aerospace industry, Sage and other companies all started saying, hey, faster, lighter, it's like the nuclear arms race. And for 45 years, almost 50 years now, we've been actually, while it's a great tool for certain things, for teaching people how to cast and for people to work on their mechanics, we've been doing the wrong thing. I'm sorry to say.
Wow. How is it that with everybody, you've got you guys, I mean, there's lots of people teaching this. Do you feel like people are just missing this? Do they know? Do they not know? Why doesn't everybody start out with an 8-foot like we're talking about here?
Well, I think it's starting very slowly to change. At least it is at the Oakland Club and the Golden Gate Club, because obviously they've had the benefit of me harping on them, for the last, 11 years. And really, the sledgehammer was Maxine and her father. When they came along, I thought to myself, hey, here's a golden opportunity to wake everybody up and show them that what happened 50 years ago with a couple of kids in San Francisco and another little upshoot kid from Oakland, that it can happen again. And it really has never stopped happening. It's just that, industries get going in certain directions. I don't know what other sports you do. Do you ski or anything else?
I've skied, snowboarded, but basketball and baseball were kind of my big sports back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. So, skiing, I had mentioned skiing earlier, and I think Tim talked about a little bit because we kind of grew up casting and fishing and then skiing in the winter times. But nonetheless, I got into the ski business after I went to my first national championship. I spent all my money and went across the country and came back and said, I need a better job and I need a winter job so I can fish and I can cast and travel in the summer. And so there was a famous Norwegian ski shop and I started doing that. This has happened in ski equipment. Not all the changes, skiing went through this maybe 20 years before fly fishing, where we had these long skis back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and it was very difficult to learn how to ski. You used to reach up and you would size the ski by hitting it in like the palm of your hand or your wrist, right? Real long ski. And then someone came up with the idea in the late 60s, hey, why don't we cut these skis shorter and let people learn on something really short that they can kind of pivot around and stuff. And so the short ski craze, at first it was called graduated length method, GLM. But, in the late 60s and early 70s, this is when most people today learned how to ski on shorter, slightly wider skis. They were called GLM learning method, and then the compact skis. And I started working at the ski shop at the same time this was really taking off. And, the bulk of the baby boomers that are just starting to retire from skiing now all learned on these shorter skis. And then late 70s and early 80s, they started making the skis longer again. And the next thing you know, we were back on 205s and 207s and 203 centimeter length skis. And now where are we all these years later on skis? Are we still on long skis or have we come back to our senses?
I'm guessing because I don't ski now, but I think we are back to short stuff.
That's right. Skis have gone back to shorter lengths and wider widths, also influenced by snowboarding.
Yep, snowboarding. Yep.
Because of the great performance, in powder and stuff. So you see other sports and other industries do this. In golf, shafts got too light, shafts got too stiff.
All right. The Big Bertha. What about the Big Bertha, the giant?
Yeah, exactly. The big drivers. And, Tiger Woods or, going back in the day, Jack Nicklaus or something. Once they've mastered their swing and their strokes, they're moving this golf shaft so much faster than we are. And I obviously can rotate a fly rod, and Tim and Steve and stuff. We can move a fly rod through the air far faster than the average person. And so, great casters and experienced anglers will need a stiffer rod. We're moving the rod a lot faster and we already know how to cast, but I wouldn't dare try to teach you with Tiger Woods driver,
Right.
super staff driver. You're not swinging the club that fast. And
yeah, that's it.
Roger Federer's tennis racket, strung at 100 pounds of tension on the strings. Well, that's not right for somebody that's moving the racket slowly when they're learning. So I think we got an opportunity here. It's kind of, like a little bit of a back to the future or renaissance. And I think it's just starting with some of the companies making shorter rods. Like the number one thing, for instance, that I do and I get these students from Silicon Valley, these Silicon Valley guys that are going to the Seychelles and
Sure.
$20,000-$30,000 trips around the world. And they come to me with, 2 weeks and they want me to fix their casting, before they go to the Seychelles. Well, how am I going to, obviously I can help them with their mechanics and give them little tips, but they don't have time to actually even tone their muscles. So the number one thing that I do for these students, for all of my students, is I immediately am going through their tackle. And if they don't own a fuller action, shorter length rod for whatever the trip is, whether it's trout fishing or, saltwater fishing, I'm getting them on shorter rods. Sometimes even loaning my students rods so we don't have time to get something so they can go on the trip and have a better experience. Scott, for instance, has their saltwater rods, and they have them in the 9-foot lengths, and they have 2-piece ones for boats at 8-foot 10-inch lengths. They also make an 8-foot 4-inch series. And, that's the number one thing I'm doing for my students is I'm fixing their tackle and I'm putting them on a shorter length lever where they can relax. So I'm going down the dumbbell rack to a lighter dumbbell, a less torquey weight, and I'm making it easy for them to go fishing for 5 days. And I'm putting them on lighter reels, and the whole outfit ends up, a saltwater outfit when I'm done ends up being like a 6-weight trout rod. And they go, God, wow. And they get this, wow, I can cast this thing. It feels like my trout rod. It's almost easier than my trout rod.
Yep.
So that's the number one thing that we have to encourage people to do is to go out to these shows and go to the fly shops and demand to try shorter length rods. And whether that's Reddington Classic Trout at 8'6", or the Scott series at 8, the G series at 8'4" or 8'8", and other companies like the budget rods like the bug launchers from TFO or rods for your kids like the Echo Gecko. Everyone needs to go out and go into the old closet, pull out grandpa's rods from the 60s, 70s, and they need to have their own wow. It's something, I'm going to, keep working. And, I've done a lot of coaching and consulting over the last 50 years. And for those companies, those American companies that actually want to start to be part of this back to the future change, I think we need more full action, shorter length levers that we can start to offer people.
Love it. That's awesome.
Everybody's got 9'5" weights, Dave.
Yeah, everybody got plenty of 9'5" weight. Well, we've always kind of almost joked about that because that's something I would ask occasionally is, the rod and the 9'5" weight. It is kind of almost a joke now, but the great thing is that, yeah, I remember my dad had a lot of 8.5-foot rods back in the day, when we first got going. I remember that. And I was always thinking as I got into it more, I was like, well, I guess the 9-foot, there's lots of these now. So I guess that's the rod. And, my dad wasn't an instructor, so he didn't really probably know exactly, but he had those rods and he was a great caster. That's the funny thing is that he was a way better caster than me. He could probably still outcast me. And he's 85.
Yeah, he learned on those shorter length levers and those fuller action rods that were a little bit heavier up top, like the upside down butter knife. Did you get a big spatula? Did you find a spatula?
Yeah, I got the spatula. What are we doing with the spatula?
Well, I'm the same thing. If you grab the spatula, because the spatula, especially if you get a big one, like a big chef spatula with a big silicone head. In fact, I'm kind of like a connoisseur of spatulas.
Is that because, are you a connoisseur of spatulas because of this fly casting exercise, or are you a good
That's
cook?
right.
Not because you're a great cook, though.
Yeah, well, no, my mom thought the dinner I cooked her last night was pretty good. But nonetheless, if you get a long-handled, real heavy silicone top spatula, and I've actually sourced some here in Portland already.
Yeah.
You not only can get this kind of kathunky feel where you feel the end of the spatula as you stop the rod, as you pantomime, but you can also stand in the mirror, right? We know that we want to make casting strokes in a plane, in some sort of a tilted plane. And you can, when you're casting and pantomiming with a spatula, you can actually hold the blade of the spatula. It's kind of like the paintbrush thing, where many people like Tim talked about, using a paintbrush to splatter, water off, right? Start slow and accelerate to a stop. And, you can imagine flicking mayonnaise off the spatula right now. Stop the rod, right? But by looking in a mirror, you can see whether you're rotating as you make your backstroke and forward stroke, up and down strokes. You can see whether the plane of the spatula is staying, lined up in the mirror, or whether you're doing something mechanically to rotate it. And so, big, long, heavy spatulas with heavy, top ends are really good when I'm doing classes, and they can look in the mirror and they can study their casting stroke as they pantomime. So these are kind of the simple things that we can do. But the upside down butter knife, that got your attention, right?
Yeah, it did. No, that's great. That's great. Well, we're going to take it out of here a little bit. I think, Chris, we're probably going to have to bring you back on and talk more, because I've been loving the history, and I want to dig more into this. But let's just talk, the greatest fly caster of all time. I mean, who is is that person living now? Who is the greatest caster out there?
Well, there's no question that Steve, big brother Steve Rajeff, is, the greatest caster in the history of the universe.
No question.
Anyone that thinks otherwise is entitled to their opinion. They're just mistaken. Steve is absolutely, you mentioned Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
We talked about guys like Kobe Bryant and stuff. Joe Montana, in the Bay Area, we grew up with a great sports team. This is why we were all motivated as kids. I didn't know anything different. My Raiders and my Oakland A's and my Warriors. When I was learning all this fishing and casting, I went to 5 straight world championship parades. And so, of course, we thought we could be champions as kids. But Steve is just an amazingly focused individual. And of all the great people, as I, grew up getting to fish with a lot of the Northern California great, fly fishing people like Andy Puyons. And we used to do the schools up in Idaho. And I got to fish with Andy every year for several years, and just famous fishing guides and stuff. But quite honestly, Steve is one of the most intense, top fishermen I've ever fly fished with. And it's, he's just super focused. But starting with the old tackle and the old great mentors that we had, and coming after the John Tarantino was one of our great young champions from the 50s and early 60s, became a professional, designed a lot of rods. And Steve came right after John's era, and had the same coach. Phil Marabelli was just a total gentleman at the club that had coached Steve. But, Steve in both accuracy and distance, and it's not just fly casting, it's all types of casting. Yeah, he's the greatest in history. And surely if I look at, the last 50 years, well, no question what Maxine has done now at the last World Championship that she cast at. She didn't cast this year because she was doing an internship over in Germany. She's 21 now. But we went to Norway 2 years ago, and she flat out outcast myself and Henry Middle, our top caster there. She outcast every man at that tournament.
Really? She outcast you, the instructor.
Yeah, Maxine at the last World Championship that she went to in Norway 2 years ago, right after the pandemic, when all the lifted and stuff. Norway sponsored the World Fly Casting Championships at a beautiful ski resort at 3,000 feet outside of Oslo. And, we only had about 10 days of training we could sneak in from when the college year. She goes to UW up in Seattle. In fact, Maxine works at a fly shop up there. Maxine works at Patrick's Fly Shop, and has been working there for the last 3 years part-time while she's in school. She's in her 4th year studying biology. But, she called me that May, and she goes, yeah, I haven't been casting, I've been fishing, but, it's like, what do you think? Should I go? And I'm like, yeah, well, it's all of us have been shut down for a couple of years. And I said, we're going to have limited time, but, after 3,000 hours as a kid, she is an absolute assassin with a fly rod. And so we got together and we put a plan together to not overtrain, but just to work on the fundamentals, the basics. And she actually broke the record in accuracy. Excuse me. Wow. The accuracy at the World Championships is 16 targets. You have 4 targets. You got to shoot at them 4 times. You got to go around the course 4 times. And you only have 5 minutes. So 16 shots in 5 minutes. And Maxine did not miss a single shot.
Wow.
That had never been done before.
Really?
She shot a perfect score. You get 5 points for every bullseye. So it turns out the maximum score is 80 points. and she scored 80 points in the qualifying round. And in the finals, I had switched. I was training a lot of new guys on the team, and I moved to the veteran division, which you can do when you're 60. I said, well, I'll move over to the veterans and try to, let's sweep all three divisions. And we did. Her father won the men's, I won the veterans.
Wow.
And Maxine won the women's. She threw the 5-weight distance, 130 feet, and beat the many-time world champion gal at that. She won the sea trout. She ended up winning 4 gold medals. I won 3 in the veterans, and she just outcast everybody.
Wow.
Two-handed salmon fly.
Two-handed too? She's doing two-handed too?
Yeah, she actually won that the first time at her second world tournament. World championships are every 2 years. And so she went when she was 12, and she actually got the bronze medal. I started to teach her the salmon fly just to take some pressure off the accuracy with the two-handed rod. She also did the spey event for fun, and she got the bronze medal, and she was only 12. And everybody's like, what the heck? In a little tiny fishing rod. I mean, I didn't even have her on a full-length rod or line or nothing, but her loops and her technique was so much better than everyone. And then, 2 years later, she was really determined to win that. She cast 189 feet
Wow.
In the hand fly distance and won the gold medal back in 2018. That championships was on the coast of England. And then that's the only event she didn't win in Norway, but she was casting it so darn far, the wind was going sideways and it kept blowing it out of court. She was throwing it 40, 50 feet past everybody, and it kept, blowing like, 2 inches to 2 feet out of court. She was kind of devastated she didn't win that, but she won everything else. And in the overall, she outscored every man and woman there.
That is amazing. What about Maxine versus Steve? What happens there?
Well, 2 weeks before that first world tournament when she was 12, she set a goal early that she wanted to beat the coach and Steve. At that first national when she was 9, she came to me afterwards. We were looking at pictures on an iPad that we had a lot of photographers, and she goes, you and Steve cast so different, and like, you're so much better than everybody. And I said, well, Maxine, I said, if you're really having fun, you want to keep doing this, I'll teach you the secrets and the things I had to figure out to beat Steve. It's going to take some time. But 2 years later, almost to the day, 2 weeks before we went to Estonia, Steve beat her in the first event the first day, and the next she was very upset. She was off to the side crying because she wanted him so bad. And the very next day in the trout accuracy, which was a great lead up to the world tournament 2 weeks later, Maxine and I both beat Steve that day in the trout accuracy. She shot 99. I think Steve shot 98. And it was the first time she beat Steve. She only had, once in a while she'd see him. He only shows up to the big tournaments. He doesn't come to the little small tournaments anymore. And so that was the first time that she beat him. And, what better timing than to beat, the greatest caster of all time 2 weeks before you go to take on the world, right?
Wow.
So beating the world 2 weeks later, seemed like nothing after beating Steve Rajeff.
God, that's so cool. And I mean, as Maxine, now I'm hopeful that we'll get her on the podcast and hear her story directly, but is she going to stick with this and continue? It's like, I think of like the, again, the analogies, right? Tiger Woods. I mean, he obviously had a collapse in personal life later in life, but he was on track to beat Jack Nicklaus, right? And is Maxine potentially going to break Steve's records if she was to keep going on this?
Well, the casting has evolved. Steve, of course, we grew up casting all the different types of tackle. We started with spinning stuff and fishing as kids with spinning reels and bait casting reels. And one of the reasons that, we all got so good overall is because when you cast different types of fishing tackle, it really helps your other casting. I mean, spin casting and bait casting really helps your fly casting and vice versa. And, we also had these two-handed surf events. And so the sport of casting has casting games that simulate all the different types of fishing tackle. And Steve became the greatest all-around overall caster, as well as being, hands down, single-handed fly distance caster, the best ever. And in accuracy, Steve and I have battled for years in that.
Yep.
So Maxine stayed very focused in on the fly casting. She did do plug casting for fun, spin casting, and she's cast on our team. So she just really got focused in on the fly casting events that are now held over water. There are events internationally held on grass. because a lot of countries just don't have casting pools and things like that, all the way back to the Cold War days. We'd be casting against people from East Germany and Czechoslovakia and things like that. So, what Maxine learned was really predominantly fly casting and to be able to go fishing with her father. And, what Steve did in all these different types of events, Maxine, is not interested in that. Her whole goal was to be able to fly cast and go fly fishing with her father. And of course they do that. Her little brother now is 13 and he plays ball and he's a fly fishing nut, and they're out at the Deschutes River all the time. So Maxine's going to continue to fish. She's fishing up outside of Seattle, in the Seattle area, and working at the fly shop. She did her first saltwater trip last spring. She went to Belize and stayed a couple of days extra with her boyfriend and went out saltwater fishing for the first time, in terms of the flats fishing, and just had a fantastic time. Immediately, she called me right away, was all excited and sent pictures. She goes, "It's just like the casting games, it's just you're picking off fish right and left."
Sure.
I mean, she really is an assassin when it comes to accuracy. And of course, distance, she can sling it as good as anybody. And she's doing a lot of casting demos. People should pay attention. There are people reaching out to her now. She did a thing out at Red's shop.
Oh, yeah.
Eastern part of the state. I think it was last June, just before she went off to the summer. But she's focused in on finishing her 4th year at college. She did an internship in Hamburg, Germany this summer. So she skipped the World Championships, and I skipped it too. The team did extremely well, but I was renovating my home of 40 years so I could sell it. Just got that done. And the father had to go through shoulder surgery. So dad and daughter and coach had to stay home this year. But, we're hearing that the next World Fly Casting Championships are going to be in Italy in 2 years. And, if the dad's going to get another shoulder surgery and heal up, and I'm planning on going with the team and coaching again. And Steve's even thinking of going, and he's starting to get smart. He's like, I think I should switch to the veterans division too. And of course, when we enter the veterans, sometimes we're still outscoring the people in the men's division. So
yeah,
it's like, hey, even the old guys, that they can still sling it. But depending on what's going on in Maxine's life, she's talked about becoming a doctor. That's something she thought about, a pediatrician possibly. But she could end up working for, Cal Trout
right.
or we've done things with Cal Trout and Trout Unlimited, like fundraisers for the Klamath dams and things like that. She's very conservation oriented. So who knows where her biology and her young career will take her. But, she's a wonderful kid. She's like a granddaughter to me, and we get together whenever we can. And I think she'll continue to fly fish, and, depending on what's going on with her life and her education, especially if her dad heals up and her dad decides to go to Italy, they're kind of joined at the hip. They like to compete at the same tournament. So, maybe we can talk Maxine into going to Italy with us in a couple of years.
Amazing. Well, I think we'll keep track of that on that event. If you wanted to, are these events, can you follow them when they're going? Is there any sort of coverage of the events?
Yeah, this year in Sweden, like they had the live postings of the scores. It wasn't being like broadcast. Casting games and fly casting sport is, it's not we all should have taken up golf instead of casting and fly.
Right.
Him and I we sit around drinking beers and joking like, why in the heck didn't we not take up golf?
Yeah, you guys would be bazillionaires by now.
But then look, I've been blessed to be able to coach and teach, for 50 years, and Steve and Tim working in the industry, and all of us consulting and stuff. And even though we're kind of in our retired years now, I think we'll continue to do that. I think this is a challenge to the manufacturers out there. Everybody owns a lot of 9'5" weights, but they don't own shorter, fuller action rods. And so I think, to me, it's a golden business opportunity to actually start to go back to the past and make some stuff that help people learn, help people improve. Especially kids,
Especially kids. No, I love that. I love where we're going with this, and I think it's great. Yeah, the funny thing, we joke about that a lot in the podcast too. Like, there's not, you don't get rich in fly fishing, right? And I mean, the fact that you guys are essentially the Tiger Woods and the Phil Mickelsons, and those guys are all multi-millionaires. That's the level you guys are at. You guys are the
yeah,
best.
but we really are blessed in many ways. The great outdoors the camaraderie and the sportsmanship in fishing in general and fly fishing in particular. And that's one of the neat things. Everyone's willing to pass on their knowledge. If they're an expert on a stream, or they're a great fly tire, or they're a great rod builder, or they're super knowledgeable, and they can share what they know about entomology and so forth. I think that's kind of the challenge I'd like to make to all my fellow, anglers and fly fishers out there is, okay, so, I teach the people, and I've been focused in on the one-on-one coaching and helping, whether it's the people getting ready for their expensive fishing trips, or a young girl and a father that shows up at the casting club. But we can all do that, and if you're super knowledgeable about your home waters, or you're, great at tying flies, or whatever, you're great at your tackle and your leaders, we can all take a young person under our wings, or someone that's coming up and taking up our great sport, and, pass on our knowledge. And I think we all can be teachers and mentors, and, if we want to. And so I challenge people to, take a young person under your wings and mentor them, and expose them to our great sport. And we need all the future conservationists we can get.
Love it. Love it, Chris. Well, I think we'll leave it there, and we'll send everybody out to KorichFlycasting.com. And I just want to thank you for everything today. This has been amazing. I always love getting into the history today. And like I said, we'll probably have to get you back on and follow up on this one. But yeah, I appreciate all the...
We'll have to get Maxine on your podcast, and, let her share her perspective. And like I said, she's giving back to the sport and having fun helping people, at the fly shop she works at. And she's motivated a lot of women and a lot of young kids, young girls, to get into the sport. And I think that's a healthy thing.
That is great. All right, Chris, thanks again for your time. I'll be in touch.
All right. Super, Dave. Thanks so much.
Your challenge, if you choose today, is to stop by your local shop and check out some of these check out some of these fuller action fly rods that we talked about today. Get some of these in your hand, however you have to do it, and get a feel for it. My guess is it is going to change your world if you haven't done it yet. All right, we're off to the next one. We've got another great episode coming up here, so if you get a chance, please follow the show. If you're interested in any of the trips, we still have that Landon trip going right now. You can message me by email, dave@wetflyswing.com, if you want to go to Colorado and check out the Landon School. This one's going to be awesome. Sight fishing for big browns, big rainbows in one of the famous rivers of Colorado with Landon Mayer. Check it in right now. Check it out. All right. Hope you have a great afternoon. Hope you have a great evening or a fabulous morning wherever you are in the world. Look forward to seeing you on that next episode. We'll talk to you then.